Hello, students. As promised, I am going to give you my responses to the discussion questions on the chapter from Todd Gitlin's book about media, Under the Sign of Mickey Mouse and Company. I hope that you had a chance to read it. I realize that by not giving you a quiz on it or making you answer discussion questions on it, some of you might not have yet gotten around to it, but it's a reading I thought was valuable and important. Gitlin is a very bright and knowledgeable person writing about media. And as I answer these questions, you'll see that my opinion is that although he has a lot to say, and much of it I think is accurate, he's a little more pessimistic than I am about the state of media. So I'll start by just looking at the question and giving you my 2 cents worth on it. So the first question says, early in the chapter, Gitlin asserts that American popular culture is the nemesis that hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of people love to hate. Why might this be true, and what, if any, impact might it have? And so he starts with the example of a champagne producer in France called Piper Heidsieck, and the place was dedicated by Marie Antoinette. But when you finish the tour, you'll see that the people that the producers are saying are evidence of what a fine product they have are celebrities such as Marilyn Monroe and Clint Eastwood. So one of the reasons why people might love to hate American culture has to do with the potential threat that it might represent to their own culture. And the French are particularly famous for being concerned about their culture getting sort of overridden or blotted out. And that probably has a lot to do with the fact that the language, the English language, has become sort of the second language for the whole world, and the French language, which once used to have a lot more influence than it did, is shrinking. So depending upon what country or culture you're coming from, you could see American popular culture as a threat to it. Another possibility is just envy, that American popular culture seems to be so rich and ubiquitous. And then another part of the question says, how might it impact us? If we're producing images for an increasingly globalized market, we might need to be sensitive to the local, regional, and national preferences of non-American audiences who might want to see themselves and their cultures presented, even if it's being done in the interest of promoting American goods and services. So as you think about visual communication, and if you have an audience, you're producing something that is sort of client-facing, and your audience is not American, even if it's an American good or service that these images are in support of, you might give some consideration to possible desires of them to be seeing themselves in your presentations. Second question, on pages 181, 183, Gitlin presents the, quote, supply side of American culture industry. Summarize his argument, explanation in that section, and indicate whether or not you find it makes sense to you and or is believable. And so Gitlin's supply side argument makes sense when we think about mass production as exemplified in Henry Ford's auto company. It also serves the production of media. The most telling statistic Gitlin used asserted that in the early 1980s, Danish television could lease a 1-hour episode of Dallas for the cost of producing a single original minute of Danish drama. An exception to this argument for the dominance of American media can be found in the labor-intensive media such as animated films, which partially explains the worldwide popularity of Japanese anime, and inexpensive labor explains why even American cartoons such as The Simpsons have outsourced the final stage of production to a studio in South Korea since the mid-90s. Question 3 asks, on page 188, 184, 189, Gitlin presents the demand side of American culture industry. Summarize his arguments, explanation in that section, and indicate whether or not you find it makes sense to you and or is believable. Gitlin's demand side argument includes more parts. He begins by quoting a defense of Euro Disney, who said, it's not American, it's Disney. He then describes American culture as a mixture of European and African culture that was not constrained by either a ruling class or religious orthodoxy. He mentions how English is read or spoken as a second language more than any other, and then names a host of Hollywood writers, actors, and directors who immigrated to America from every corner on the earth. He concludes by quoting a psychologist who describes American culture as dominated by, quote, a fun morality. Thou shalt have fun. So I think, to me, that makes a lot of sense, that if you go and you look at French culture, it's very French. German culture is very German. And American culture is from all over the world. And because we don't have, say, the long-standing rigid class structures that might be found in Great Britain, and because we don't have a national religion, our culture is free from the kind of dominance by an aristocracy or dominance by an ecclesiastical structure. And so that's what made it freer and, I think, more popular. All right. Question number 4. Gitlin asserts that in a world of image-choked markets, sellers signal buyers what to expect, and the formula and style are 2 principal signals. What are the 3 now global formulas that Gitlin says are especially formidable? How persuasive do you find his claims about those formulas? How useful do you find his 3 formula analysis for understanding American popular culture? So, the 3 formulas Gitlin proposes are the Western, the action movie, and the cartoon. Clearly, the Western has provided a tremendously successful and resilient formula for American TV and movie fodder. Gitlin may be going overboard when he categorizes cop shows, detective stories, and even 60 Minutes as variants of the Western. But there is something to be said for the universal appeal of the, quote, rugged everyman who served the community without being roped into it. A seeming substantial decline of actual Westerns among current TV offerings and theatrical releases may be the result of an increased popular awareness of how the West was won, included something akin to genocide of the original native peoples. So I think the Western has been extremely influential in American popular media, visual media, but I think it may have run its course, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Gitlin writes that the so-called action movie displays a harsher, more cynical attitude than media produced under the Western formula. Gitlin is highly critical of this genre that offers, quote, the pleasure of nihilistic transcendence. He lists several directors who raise the stakes of blood and gore and gets philosophical about the purposes of entertainment before throwing up his hands when he states the producer's defense. The purveyors of casual violence, gore, and threat, when pressed, take a walk on the demand side and offer a predictable alibi. Suppliers deliver only the good demanded. He concludes his indictment of action movies by writing, quote, it isn't bad enough that the movies are ugly. To be judged bad, they have to do bad. The campaign against virtual violence is as shallow as the images it condemns. So Gitlin here is sort of getting on his high horse and condemning a genre which, again, clearly it's very popular. They keep making these movies. They do very well in the box office. Clearly there are ethical and moral issues about filling people's minds with this kind of blood and gore. And so he's showing himself to be, somewhat traditional and somewhat conservative in questioning the dangers and the damages that this particular genre of images produces. Gitlin calls cartoons ceremonies of innocent wackiness and describes how Walt Disney succeeded in creating such a profitable empire. He describes that early 1970s resistance to Disney as propaganda justifying capitalist greed and displaying a smugness toward backward savages. After quoting one critic of Disney, Gitlin concludes, America, child of the West, youngest of civilizations, is singular in its affirmation of childishness, and is both cherished and despised for it, but the appeal of its cartoon childishness is undeniable. And so I think he makes a good point there, and sort of the appeal of Disney and the appeal of cartoons is something that older cultures, maybe more sophisticated cultures, wouldn't have gone there. And it's something particularly American to say, we've got this Daffy Duck and Porky Pig and Mickey Mouse, and we think these things are just wonderful. So in summary on this question, I think Gitlin may have tried to include too many disparate approaches to story under the Western formula, but his indictment of the action movie and his explanation of the appeal of cartoons felt fairly convincing to me. I think the action movie and the cartoon are very useful categories for understanding a great swath of American culture, and I believe that an analysis of box office receipts and television viewership would support the notion that these two formulas provide keys to much of American culture. As for the Western, I think the sun may have set on that formula as a key to understanding American popular culture. Furthermore, Gitlin neglected to include what at times represents a large section of American media, the shows and movies that might be called romantic comedies or chick flicks, which I don't think would fit easily in the three formulas he proposes. Question number 5. Compare Gitlin's account of what CBS Vice President for Television Research said on page 204 with what Leslie Moonves, a CEO of CBS, recently said about Donald Trump. That is, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. The TV executive claimed to have only one interest. That's whether people watch the program. That's my definition of good. That's my definition of bad. Les Moonves said regarding then-candidate Donald Trump's impact on viewership during the 2016 presidential race, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. Both quotes relate to what Gitlin had written previously about the studio's defense of their blood and gore-soaked action films. The demand side determines what gets produced and shown. Question number 6. Comment upon the accuracy, truth, and or significance of Gitlin's assertion that, insofar as there are unifying symbols today, they should be undemanding ones. Not the cross, the crescent, or the flag, let alone the hammer and sickle, but Coke and Mickey Mouse. Gitlin's claim about the necessity of unifying symbols being undemanding ones depends, I think, upon his claim about American media's fundamental commitment to popularity. He writes, "Here is the not-so-hidden secret at the heart of American media. Because they have no other goal than to be popular, they are eminently marketable by mighty corporations that have no cultural commitment whatsoever. If it sells, it sells. If people watch, we'll copy and rebroadcast." So that's getting to the underlying capitalist principle that supply and demand will determine what we get. One cynic said, "Nobody ever went broke underestimating the taste of the American people." And so here he is saying that because there are no underlying principles, we don't have a belief in what TV shows we should show, what movies we should make. What will be made is what is believed will sell, and that sort of is a consequence of the sort of commercial capitalist for-profit industry of making TVs and movies. If you think about the difference in the quality of product that you would find on PBS, you can say, okay, there's some credence to that idea that the messages and the unifying symbols will be undemanding because the messages that will be made are the ones that are going to sell. Question 7. How seriously do you take Gitlin's conjecture on page 207 that Hollywood's premium style, quote, threatens to diminish the cultural repertory of makers and audiences alike? And here in 7 and 8 is where I part company from Gitlin. I think he's smart. I think he knows a lot. I think we ought to take seriously his concerns. But what I say is, this one, I don't take it too seriously. My familiarity with classical literature tells me that literary and cultural critics have for centuries been saying that the sky is falling. But every day I go out, look up, and it's still there. I think there will always be independent and low-budget shows and films that will operate counter to the dominant, big-budget, high-production value fare that will attract most of the people. While I understand the dangers of monopolies, I don't think market dominance itself stifles either creativity or the market for it. Number 8. Gitlin concludes the chapter with what sounds like rather apocalyptic predictions for the future of media and civilization. Summarize his closing remarks on page 208 to 210 and say how realistic and pessimistic you'll find them. Gitlin describes a flood of mostly bad media content filling our world with mostly bad images, damaging our senses and sensibilities, and making it harder for artists to produce good images and for consumers to find and view them. While I find his take quite pessimistic, I don't find it very realistic. Once again, I take comfort from the ancients, in this case the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who wrote that change is the only constant. There have been periods of great art and creativity and periods of low creativity and bad art. While there are economic and political forces that might make it easier and more profitable to produce crap right now, that will change, and we will experience another period where economic and political forces will foster more great cultural content. At least that is how I see things. So that's my take on Todd Gitlin. I'm going to save this, post it in YouTube, add it into our Canvas site, and then I'm going to send an announcement that it's there, but I'm also going to announce that in Canvas there is an anonymous, there's a request for anonymous students' review of the course. So in a written announcement, I'll point out where that is, and that's something that you should fill out before, I think it closes on April 30th. So the next thing you'll be seeing from me a little later in the week is another video, and this one will be talking about the final theorist that we talk about, and that is Huxley and his view of how vision works in images. So be back at you shortly.